Michael Faraday by Glen Kealey. The most important thing I think that you have to remember is people in charge are not getting the whole story from their staff, aka their assistants. For example, in a court they call the staff the registry. Registry is made out of two concepts in the code. The first one is rego and the second is Troy. That means that you may think that you are applying to a court for something, but the registry keeps you uninformed as to what is required and can get the judge to say that you haven't responded to the requirements. Then the judge, of course, has no idea what's going on because he's not kept informed of the day-to-day happenings. The fact that the people who are in the registry are in fact sleeper cells, born to immigrants in the country or brought in as immigrants to get pregnant later and have a child. The guy that attacked Parliament Hill back in October, his mother is one of the executives at the refugee board. They're the ones who decide who's allowed to come into the country as a refugee. When they hold a panel or court, the judge can write out the decision, which goes into a file and is never seen by the applicants. The anthropologists who work in the office can rewrite the decision and send out it under his signature as opposed to a signature from a judge. That judge would think that he did his job and doesn't follow the case any longer, while the court seems to have rendered a decision. If you apply to another court for a leave to appeal, you face the same problem. That exists all the way up to the Supreme Court. Phonetically, it comes down to the words leave to appeal. In other words, a leaf on a tree receives the energy from the sun. From that energy, it has to make a seed for the next generation. That seed normally comes out as fruit, but necessarily it could be just a seed by itself. Leave to appeal means the energy transferred from leaf to the peel or of the fruit that is to be the product of the tree. But the journey between the leaf and the fruit is a twig. If you remember, in most of the courts, judges wore wigs. If number 2 is number 1 and instead of the word twig you replace it with wig, it explains that journey. Over a twig is what we call bark. In other words, something that comes from the ark. A genetically engineered journey is what it is describing. A judge is the twig, but the one with the contact on the outside is the bark. The judge never sees the fruit because the journey ends at the peel. The fruit itself is a separate item. For example, when you go into Supreme Court, it is the right of the judges to refuse to hear your case. That's why you have to make an application based upon the concept of leave to appeal. In other words, the judge has the right to refuse, but he/she may never even see what he/she's accepting or refusing. That decision would have been made by the people who control the twig, or in other words, the bark. They're the ones that speak out loud to the public, just like a dog barks. They can prevent you from getting a hearing. They do that by writing rules for lawyers so that if you're not a lawyer, you're not able to work your way through the mechanisms they have set up. They don't accept the fact that as a citizen you should have the right to appeal without a lawyer. That's what Jenny and I are fighting with the courts in Canada. The decision made by the Refugee Board was made by a judge, and after listening to him speak in 3 separate sessions, I would say he did not write the decision that was sent that ends up then going to the federal court for appeal. If he did, some parts of it have been extracted. The decision he supposedly rendered was sent to us unsigned by the judge, and only signed by a guy. The judge in our first meeting had described as, he's just an office boy type. He just does paperwork. But that guy has a university degree in anthropology. As a graduate in anthropology, he is interested in genetics more than in actual applicants. If he can get the right genetics into the country, then those become the sleeper cells that are available to anyone who is running an underground operation of terrorists. So they can fill the bureaucratic part of any court, of any police department, of any government agency or department with their people over time, of course. It takes a while, and the more they infiltrate the department, the easier it becomes to appoint the next employees. That's how a mother ends up at the Refugee Board, and her son ends up shooting a soldier on Confederation Square and then runs into the House of Commons with a rifle and begins to shoot inside the building, where he is then murdered by another bureaucrat called the Sergeant at Arms. Arms is a secret word linked to the name Mary, Marie in French. Mary is the mother of virgin birth for all Christians. It is a derivative of the word marinate, Marinate is soften them up for the kill, soften them up for the cooking pot. It is based upon the diagram that I have of the big plan where the participants from Adam down to Mary and the journey that they take is shaped like an 8, 0. As in Marin 8, or NATO, or Plato. All of it is coded information which prevents the average person on the street to know that everything is rigged by those people who have genetically engineered and later tweaked the genetics of every human being on the planet today. This has taken them 6,000 years, from 4,000 BC to 0 AD, and 2000 AD from 0. Over a 6,000 year period on a plan suggested by the 7th in the lineage from Adam, a man called Enoch, who then demonstrated its effectiveness by creating a child called Methuselah, who was the longest living human being if you believe the Bible. Enoch proved that you could remake human beings. Therefore, Noah could follow up by creating a boat, Noah's Ark, on which the DNA of every living species was placed while the existing gene pools were killed in a mass genocide, which was linked to a flood. Exactly what we're expecting out of Lake Superior down to Flushing, New York. The more we go through the system, analyzing it step by step. I don't want to take credit for it because most of the credit belongs to cellular memory, which for short we call the cell. Cellular memory remembers all of the material that was placed in archives from 7500 BC. Therefore, knows more, can figure out more of why people do the things they do. One example, if you take 12 footballs and you put them in a team's locker room and one person takes one football and kind of practice with it because there's only a few minutes before the game, the other 11 footballs remain in the locker room during that period in time. If one considers that a locker room is designed based on a theory that a magnetic lying below can be used over time and time again to send a magnetic message to the human beings who use that locker room, that would lead to failure of many organs, but mostly on a short-term basis, aka depression. If you're a gambler and you bet on the usually winning team to win, and you know that before they go out for a certain game, many of the players will be depressed, the chance of you making money by betting on them to lose is pretty good. What happens when an electromagnetic field sends out its surcharge? Does it blow up something? If a football happens to be there, some of the air will be forced out of the football. When you remove the magnetic field, which only exists when someone sends an electrical charge because a magnetic field by itself is not strong enough to do it, but if you send an electric charge to a magnetic field, you double its strength for the time that the electricity charges the magnet. That is what causes the problem. Then you shut off the electricity. The magnetism goes back to its regular place. If you build a vehicle such as General Motors did, and you base the technology of your starter on a magnetic field being sent, a message from that battery, and then increases its power, it turns it on. If you shut off the electricity, it turns it off. Therefore, General Motors, unknown to them, are now being sued and paying billions of dollars because people have been driving their vehicles down the road, usually at a speed of highway driving, and the starter shuts itself off. Basically meaning, of course, that you don't have power steering, you don't have power brakes, none of the control mechanisms in the car work, and people have been killed both in and outside of vehicles, and General Motors is being sued for billions. They don't realize that what those persons were doing were crossing a magnetic field, that the magnetic field when charged would shut off their vehicle. That can only be done by one group of people, the people we here in Ontario called Hydro. The Ontario Hydro is who distributes the energy. I can tell you firsthand about all of this since I live right on top of a magnetic field which Hydro used a rod to link to my telephone and brings a magnetic field into the house, which over a period of 5 years of staying in the basement has caused me a medical condition called hydrocele. It blew up a portion of my stomach. When it shut off, it caused it to drop into my scrotum and prevented me from getting an erection, which they can control by selling you pills of Viagra. That's the lesson you learn when you have a functioning brain that realizes unless you do something about it, you are not a human being of the same quality and kind that existed 7,000 years ago. You are in fact a walking dead person. You have inherited from the original, and it has been tweaked over time through your ancestry. The requirements of a robot, when you say you like something or you hate something, it's your subconscious making the decision. The subconscious can be deciding on their behalf rather than on yours. That's why you have so many alcoholics, because many of the things people do drunk, they would not do sober. That's how the system functions. Every human being you see around you that has not got that information and subsequently can't make that linkage is standing around saying, that's not me. I would never do anything like that. Yet every time a mass murderer occurs or a serial rapist is on the loose and they catch them, the people who know the person say, I never would have believed that she would do something like that because it's not them. Right on, it's not them. It's the robot being manipulated by an electromagnetic field imposed by genetic engineering over the last 6,000 years. That's the problem we have in the world today. Why are policemen shooting black guys? Why are other people shooting policemen? It's because they've been genetically engineered and are being manipulated by electromagnetic fields. What's the symbol of that electromagnetic information? It's called the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is a box designed for electromagnetic control. If you sit in a house over a magnetic field, chances are that over time you will be manipulated beyond your control unless you know what they're doing. The only way you can know what they're doing is to have a sweep of the entire property you live in. Using a magnetometer, you can define the level of uncharged magnetism in your area. And what is the level of magnetism that is charged once Hydro sends you a surcharge that's grounded? Electromagnetism has existed from the first moment that someone was able to see lightning occur on the planet. The lightning charges are already existing magnetism. No, the lightning charges the already existing magnetism. But if you want to control it rather than waiting for just a lightning bolt to occur, what you do is you link it to your electricity by putting in a magnetic rod called an A-rod, and that A-rod completes the word road, spelled scrambled as road. It's the road we're on, it's the way, it's the journey that we're on. Sending a surcharge of electricity to your house, they can awaken the magnetic below it, and it will return its electromagnetic power through filaments. In other words, it needs very fine wiring. Hydro wires are not fine enough to do that, but telephone wires are fine enough. Think of it like an incandescent light bulb. Electricity travels through wires and no light occurs, but the minute you send it in a vacuum past a filament and glows and turns on light, if that can tell you that a flashlight that runs on electromagnetic fields, which is how they design it, with a wire within leading to a filament, and by moving it up and down you can cause a magnetic field to be built and turn on the light. If they can tell you that device is dangerous and put warnings on the side of it, imagine what it is when you're sending power directly from 220 volts, for example, going into the ground, lighting up the magnet, and sending through the lightning rod. By the way, they've changed the type of ground they now use. It's called plate. Is an accident that they call it plate? When a plate is what you put inside of you, sits on until you put it in your mouth. And at the other end, when you die, they call you the late Mr. So-and-so, like late Mr. Heinemann. None of the English language is there by accident. It is a product of learning the lesson of starting off with the language. They call it the language of Jesus 2,000 years ago. Converting that to the emperors meant that it then became Latin, Roman, converting where the Romans spent most of their time and moving into the area that would eventually develop North America. The languages of New Modern Type English and Spanish. By the way, for Christoph Columbus's sake, he was Italian, but he was funded by the Spanish monarchy. Spanish was created in the year Christopher Columbus came to America. Coming to Canada, Christopher came in 1534. He was funded by the French, went back home, told the French. They send a guy by the name of John Chabot, whose relationship in the code converts to Puss Boots, the one with the money that finances things to happen. John Chabot is the one that gave the okay for the Louis the Sioux, the making of the North American continent, and eventually its destruction. John Chabot, basically funded by the nuns of Rome, who had the archives of everything going back to 7500 BC. Göbekli is where the archives begin for the time after the Ice Age. The only people who would have that are the nuns in the monasteries, because the priests go out and get it, bring it in and think it's theirs, but the nuns are the bureaucracy, and they pilfer and steal from the archives all of the important stuff. So that over time, nunneries, like the Carmelites, which are the blue nuns, began the process of transferring everything into modern language. In North America, they were assisted by the Grey Nuns, which was created by the wife of a bootlegger in Montreal. Nuns have the data. They do genetic engineering. They do it in secret, and that's why nuns always were told that they had to wear garments down to the floor so that they would not appear to be pregnant when they were. In Asia, the women are told to wear a burqa and even hide their faces so they could be using a disguise for men and other women when they're doing something secretive, such as crossing a border, so that people think they're women who are part of the community. But it's basically just a disguise. No woman in her right mind would want to dress that way with just her eyes showing. That's basically telling the world, I'm not important. There's nothing about me that anybody in the world could care for. They become slaves to a man who treats them like slaves, and if the man won't do it, then the community will. Family, community, then country. Pause.